Hello, and welcome to Enabling Privacy-Safe Data Collaboration for Financial Services, brought to you by NowVertical Group. The purpose of this discussion is to address some of the data challenges faced by financial services and talk through the available solutions, including the advantages of accessing, sharing, and leveraging data via cloud-based platforms like NowAffinio. My name is Cody Shankman. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer of NowVertical Group, and I'll be your moderator. I'm also joined today by Anand Pandya of Hakoda and Tim Burke of NowAffinio. To start, I want to give you a quick intro to those of you who aren't as familiar with us. We are NowVertical Group. We are a network of big data, AI, and enterprise technologies led by industry experts, working across all of your intelligence and data and automation needs, with the sole goal of ultimately providing organizations, both in the public and private sector, with the confidence to make bold, data-backed decisions. We do this through the application of what we call vertical intelligence, which is why we want to have this conversation today. VI is all about solving the problems that you have at hand with the software and solutions necessary, not about building generalizable intelligence, but in fact, really specific solutions to the problems that exist and doing it in a smart and scalable way. And we do that by creating ultimately vertically intelligent organizations. And obviously, we'll be focusing today specifically on financial services and looking at some of the problems and solutions that exist when it comes to your handling of data, cloud, and doing it all at scale. Now, I'm going to hand it over to our panelists to introduce themselves and walk us through the problems that exist for customers in the financial services.
Hey everybody, Anand, Pandya. I'm the head of financial services here at Hakoda. Hakoda is a consulting and managed services provider. We're focused on really modernizing kind of data platforms. And ultimately the world needs data engineering talent. So when you're looking at talent, it really needs that meaningful purpose, focus on data and the core of where it's going. And that's really what we bring to the table with our experience of having built the initial pieces 25 years ago. We learned what didn't work, and we know in the modern tech stack what works best. So that's who Hakoda is. Myself, I've been in space the last 10 years and have spent time as a data and analytics provider in the financial services space at Icon and Informa and Kiranos most recently. So definitely understand a lot of the trials and tribulations that organizations in the space are feeling around trying to understand the data at hand.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Anand. And my name's Tim Burke. I'm the president of NowAffinio. We got acquired by the NowVertical Group back in the fall of 2021. The foundation of our technology comes from custom-built graph technology at the core. So what we're doing uniquely is analyzing data in a unique way where we're actually looking for the connections in your data fundamentally. And through such, you can actually start to identify really interesting patterns in your data that surface in a way where you can have a deep understanding around customers, audiences, around similarities in their behaviors, and ultimately letting that guide your strategy and monetization strategy of those audiences. So we started about 10 years ago. Most recently, we have started porting that core technology into embedding it inside Snowflake so that our technology can be used inside your data inside Snowflake without having to move that data or expose it. So it's heavily focused on privacy-safe analytics. And we see huge applications as it applies to obviously the financial services sector, as well as deep understanding of your customers as a whole. And that's going to be a main focus for our conversation today. So challenges that we're seeing, and Anand and I, you can sort of bounce these ideas off as well. But from our perspective, many of the themes that we've seen in market stem around things like siloed data access. So organizations that are collecting massive amounts of data, but oftentimes have it located across the organization in siloed locations. So a lack of unification of that data is problematic in a lot of ways. For obvious reasons, there's a shift and a drastic shift and a continuous shift in sort of the risk propagation across that data itself and its usage across the organization. And then, Anand, maybe you can reflect on sort of the usefulness of that data and certainly the competitive landscape as it pertains to sort of technology companies.
Yeah, I think for the longest time, financial services as a whole has been somewhat commoditized. And I think people saw it as a place to get a certain product or a service, and the nascent nature of a physical-based distribution, i.e. branch and offices, really had an intrinsic way where you knew your customer. If you just roll back the clock 10 years, you'd go to your branch and you'd go to the same branch and you'd talk to the same people. So inherently and intrinsically, they would know more about you, whereas you were going for an individual product or service. To your point, Tim, as the industry as a whole has changed through technology, through consumer technology, through everybody's favorite time over the last 3 years, the entire paradigm has changed. So you've got this new focus on a consolidated or rationalized set of brands that have survived based on either scale or specialism. And you've had the entrance of neobanks and big techs and fintechs really setting fire and offering a full set of services and embracing kind of what those full service requirements are. So when you're looking at it as one of those legacy organizations, this pivot has occurred where you've got to relearn your customer and you've got to refocus everything you're doing around your customer. And data ultimately lies at the heart of driving relationship over transactions.
Certainly, relative to how we're approaching this and collectively with Hakoda, heavy focus on the efforts that we've been putting together around Snowflake and around sort of this marketplace and vertical as a whole means speaking directly to sort of centralizing that view of a customer across your disparate data sets, right? So beginning in framework of actually unifying and centralizing data into a usable format. Obviously, Snowflake is a key opportunity for us to do and enable that. But oftentimes organizations are only at the very early stages of that and looking to sort of optimize and maximize that and accelerate that path, because as Anand referred to, I mean, it's competitive in nature, and this is sort of the fundamental starting point. For us also, obviously, building on top of that data asset into a format which enables analytics at speed, at the fingertips of your end users, and being able to extend those analytics more broadly outside of just your first party data or that inside your organization into a realm where you can collaborate with other organizations in a privacy safe format, right? So as you referred to, Anand, right, we go full tilt from, you know, one extreme where it used to be one-to-one in terms of customer experience within these institutes. I mean, we obviously have reached massive scales, but the importance of understanding the affinities and passions and interests of your customer still translates into a huge business value proposition, right? And so what we're talking about from a solutions perspective is going on this journey to, as Anand said, sort of relearn that experience or relearn more about our customer to sort of centralize it into the primary focus of a go-forward plan.
Right, and it really just boiled down, you know, Tim, what you ultimately laid out. It presents the proverbial staring up at a mountain that a lot of institutions face, because there's this idea that I have to return to basics. I have to understand my customer. Well, in my own data, I collect a lot of data. I have all kinds of sales cycle and onboarding and inquiry and servicing and third-party bureaus and all kinds of information somewhere in the organization, but it's siloed. I think we just saw the poll pop. There's just silos everywhere there is to go. And the question is, how do you start to bridge those? Oh my gosh, that's an IT exercise. How am I supposed to do that? And then it's, okay, so once I get it all together, oh my gosh, I have to buy new software, I have to buy new hardware, I have to make sense of all this stuff. Well, data science is all the rage, so I have to go hire 10 PhDs and staff them somewhere and have them under. So you're positioning this, I have to do all these things, and all my disruptors are coming at me in a new place. And that's where you start to see technology as the helper and not just the disruptor. And that's where Snowflake comes into play, where the ease of centralization, that breaking of silos, bringing it all together. If you can write a SQL query, you can use Snowflake to its fullest. That simplicity, you don't need all those extra maintenance pieces and tools. As long as you have guidance on the right way to use Snowflake, that's how you can leverage those skill sets. Have the same idea of, do you want to program an entire Jarvis-like system, or can you get those smart devices to help you out? That automation, that ability to accelerate. And then to your point, what about the data I don't have? What about interactions and sentiments and profiles and affinities? How do I get that information readily? Where Snowflake comes into play and Snowflake's ecosystem comes into play is to turn that mountain into a molehill, where it becomes traversable and it becomes accessible, and it's not the effort and investment and time and pain, if you will, that it may have been 5-10 years ago. So to your point, Tim, how do we take the technology and data at hand to allow us to execute on the shift from way we've been doing it on a product first basis to a customer centric basis, and start to understand the patterns in our data and start to understand the propensities and the affinities that lie amongst the customer pool we have? How do you start to carve out segmentation? How do you understand that? And I like this view that we've kind of put together, because I think when we talk about data on hand and we talk about silos and we talk about the same report you've looked at for a decade now, it's that same pricing deck every Monday that you go through and you review. That's that data on hand. That's that box of Legos that you've had or your kids have had for forever. And it's the same box, and they know how to build some things from it, but that box usually just sits there. And maybe they've got some stuff on a shelf that collects dust, and they might break it apart, they might look at it, but in actuality, it's just there. Flip side being what we were just talking about. I've got to do everything, where you buy individual sets. You can build this, and you can build this really, really well. But if you want to do something different, well, I've got to go buy a new set. I've got to go buy a new set. And that's that mentality. I have to do it all. It's going to take forever. This middle is what we keep kind of talking about. Or if you can just get your arms around, what components do I have? What do they look like? What do they feel like? You start to spark different ideas. Well, I can build this today, but then I can build that tomorrow, or I can add on to it in a different way. And I start to reach different ways of looking at it. So that idea of, I have all this data, but I don't need to have everything perfect. That kind of perfect is the enemy of success, if you will. Trying to get everything just right. And maybe you'll hit that pace in 2025, but it's 2022 and you've got to deliver now. So how can you start to get your arms around the right now? How do you get your arms around what you can do today to manifest returns and build on top of it to stay agile? And I think that's where we're kind of coming around, where knowing your customer doesn't mean you have to have everything ready today. It means you're starting to move towards the path of understanding component level elements that allow you to do more and then feed it in an iterative manner.
And I love the concept of Lego, because we've spoken a lot around sort of the applications that we're building for Snowflake as exactly that. It's sort of a set of Lego blocks that can be translated across different data assets, across different parts of your organization. But fundamentally, as we just described, right? As you build on top of those and as you leverage those to basically gather more momentum, gather more insight, gather a deeper understanding of your customer, it translates, right, across other data assets that you now pull into the storyline. If you're incrementally starting to add new data to your organization from a first party perspective, the key here to me is that you're not building something that's standalone, that as soon as you bring in a new data asset, you have to, like you said, go buy a new product or a new offering or build a custom net new model, right? This concept of fundamental sort of models being, available basically within your framework of Snowflake and available across your organization that can then sort of build on, so that as you add more data assets, as you start to sort of, join into a centralized view, the value extends, directly and scalably in that format without necessarily having to go to market and find a new solution for a new data set that we just brought into the mix, right? To anybody sort of familiar with Affinio over the years, like our graphical sort of representation of these segmented audiences and segmented customer bases has sort of become almost a trademark for our organization. And recognizing what we're doing right now is being able to sort of port that core concept and technology inside Snowflake such that you can start to build this dynamic segmentation. Anand, you and I have talked about this for a while, right? Besides sort of the Lego building blocks that everybody relies on, there's sort of a traditional go-to segmentation strategy for this vertical that sort of, is still leaned on heavily, right? Yep. Having recognized though, you and I both have discussed as part of this, is trends, the speed with which trends are changing with time, certainly past and, pre and post the pandemic at a global scale. Many of those strategies in terms of segmentation of sort of a one and done model, right? Like I segment my audience once, I carve it into pieces, break it apart. I use that model for 1 year, 2 year, 5 year roadmap, right? I think what everybody's sort of waking up to is that those models and trends don't apply through these types of dynamic changes in global markets, et cetera, right? So what we're seeing here in front of you is essentially a version of what we're able to do inside Snowflake right now, where we're actually looking at and segmenting on dynamic row level consumer-based behaviors at the core, right? So what we're trying to do is translate those into dynamic segments, and from the discussions we had before and on, even around personalization, right? When we come from a world where, again, it was one-to-one, I mean, you have obviously the holy grail is to be able to talk to every customer on a one-to-one basis in the digital world. But the reality is that many of your customers in segments behave very similar to one another, right? And if you can exploit that and take advantage of it, you then can deliver a very personalized consumer experience to the end user, except you're delivering that same experience to hundreds of thousands to millions of people simultaneously, because you're able to see and strategize around those signals before you even start to make that personalized attempt, right? So from our perspective, our graph technology is essentially able to ingest a consumer-based identifier inside of Snowflake in a privacy-safe way, looking at their behaviors across your organization. So that can be everything from lending behaviors to literally service and support to what activity they're doing on your mobile app. And simultaneously in an automated fashion, segment those audiences based on those behaviors, finding those common behavioral patterns such that they become sort of what we would deem a dynamic segmentation, right? And this is a matter of doing this on sort of an hourly basis as opposed to once every 5 years, right? You can start to now leverage the dynamic nature of Snowflake and the Snowflake data warehouse in terms of its creation and update of that data into a format that your strategy can keep up with the changes in time, right? So I think this is the exciting thing for us, is obviously lending itself into a dynamic means with which to evaluate and explore audiences and customer engagements and behaviors in a format that hasn't been possible or has required 6 months to a year, externally sourced consultants to come in and do this type of work. And now we're talking about translating that into insights that are at your fingertips within minutes.
I want to bring this all the way down to a ground level as to, okay, what does this mean for me at a retail bank? And the best example I can come up with is going to be this kind of combination of home equity or personal lending. It has been this kind of sidecar product with mortgages on the real estate side, or personal lending has come on strong in the last few years. But ultimately, the goal was a lending solution that is of normally a smaller loan amount that is meant to provide liquidity to a customer. And the way that it has been done in the past is, Tim, exactly as you mentioned, it's either they're going to go, the bank, if you will go to the CBA conference once a year, and they'll see a presentation from an industry expert, and they'll understand, okay, here's what home equity's been doing, here's what home equity's going to do, okay, that's what we're going to do. Or they're going to have another consultant come in every 6 months and say, okay, here's how everything looks, this is your strategy for the next 6 months. Or if they're really advanced, they have a drop-down menu when you fill out your application online, and they just tag you and say that's what you're using it for. Or if they're really, really advanced, they wait for 24 months and they see, okay, over the last 2 years, what has your behavior been for a line of credit, perhaps? That is considered advanced, and that is considered timely, because there was never really a means or a way, because the way they had to do it was either they had to get pricing data with originations data, with marketing data, with servicing data, with risk data, and all these different silos. And they had to put it all together. More often than not, they had an analyst who had Excel, and they really hoped Excel didn't crap out. And they bring all this data in, and they put some pivot tables together, and ta-da! If you borrowed every March, well, clearly you were doing this for taxes. And if you borrowed twice a year, once in December and then once again in August, well, clearly you're doing this for college savings. And if you did it once and then you never drew off of that line, well, clearly that's a rainy day saver. And if you're doing this mid-year and then you do it again next year, well, that's going to be travel saving. And I think based on your credit report when you did this, well, that's got to be debt consumption. It's a lot of conjecture. It's a lot of assumptive reasoning based on one or two inflection points. The change, to your point, Tim, is that isn't fast enough. When we talk about modern data, we talk about the modern ecosystem. It's not just about volume. It's about agility and response. It's about digestion and interpretation. And that's the inflection point. It's how do you start to take all these pieces that are generating data, easily digest, compartmentalize, and return, ultimately activate and action what that data is telling you. 24 hours is 24 hours too late in some cases. So how can you adjust on the fly based on events happening? This is where Snowflake comes into play. There's the speed, there's the pay per use, there's the ability to scale infinitely, but it's that broader marketplace concept, that data sharing like that. You click a button and you're starting to bring in demographic data and identity data and sentiment data and other institutions data and bureau data and all these different components that are just a click away. When you feed those pieces into Affinio's technology, you start to not create these behaviors based on assumptive logic. Now you're using actual attribute-laden behavioral patterns to say, based on the whole gamut, the whole picture of a full modern profile, i.e. their interaction histories, their demographics, other institution data, personal preferences, income, milestones, tech preferences, household relationships, credit rating, all these different pieces put together at an attribute level, at a behavioral level, starts to draw these patterns. You know now that this is a travel saving initiative because the loan came hand in hand with a bunch of research on cheapcaribbean.com. You know that this person has been researching electric vehicles, and they're also looking on what's the cost to install a charging station in my garage, or I need to do these different things. Is it safe? All these different components start to bubble up to the surface. So you can create targeted strategies. What lending leaders have been given at institutions is the ability, if not carte blanche, to create stimulation promotions to get people to lean into, even though the cost of debt is rising, the demand is still there. So how can you get people to do more? How can you incentivize that action? How can you start to do that? Because if you are a bank, you have to hold capital reserves relative to lines of credit. So you need people to use that money so that you can do more. So being able to do this and doing it quickly, to your point, Tim, doing it at scale, at pace, and being able to be dynamic and fluid, either adding new sources at the drop of a hat or easily reallocating and remapping everything. Yeah. Being able to do that allows you to be fluid, be responsive. And as we talked about, that mountain becomes a molehill, and the ability to run up and down is now a multi-time activity, not a Everest-like scale. And that's that combination of technology, ability, and incremental value. You don't have to have everything at the ready, but you can start to see returns in a more rapid fashion.
And I think that's the compelling part here. Breaking down the silos, net is great, but actually aligning your strategy and segmentation around a centralized view of a customer experience is a key opportunity and a huge one that's being missed by many organizations right now.
That's all we have for today, but thanks to everyone for joining us. For anyone interested in continuing the conversation, you can reach Tim and Anand for follow-up questions via their contact information on screen. We'll also have some team members in Las Vegas for Snowflake Summit from June 13th to 16th. If you're interested in scheduling some time, you can just follow the Calendly link seen here. Thanks again for joining today's webinar on enabling privacy-safe data collaboration for financial services. Hope you have a great day, and we look forward to seeing you next time.